But we don't actually know who gave the message to Dr. Joseph Warren that General Thomas Gage was going to march out to Concord, because he had pretty specific info, and there were only 2 people in the entire world who knew the plans for Concord, and one was Colonel Smith, who was in charge of that whole expedition, and the other was General Gage's own wife, Margaret Kimball Gage. And we highly suspect, even though we don't know, we suspect that she was the one who ferried that information over, being actually born in the colonies. I'll have more on her later, but it's a pretty unhappy story. So Paul Revere, he's alerting people all the way from Boston to Lexington, and he gets to Lexington, and he finds 2 people there of supreme import to the revolutionary cause. He finds Sam Adams and John Hancock there, who are 2 of the more ridiculous figures in Revolutionary era history. Both, when he told them that the Redcoats were coming, not only to march on Concord, but to capture and presumably kill them, instead of leaving, they started polishing their swords, and to each other, talking about how many redcoats they were gonna would be lying at their feet by the end of the night. Paul Revere, meanwhile, is trying to convince them to leave, go to some other town, and he fails and keeps going out into the countryside because he's trying to get to Concord, warn those guys. He meets up with Dawes in Lexington, decides to leave. He leaves the 2 of those arguing. Goes up to Concord, and on the way, meets a random guy in the road that he's never met. And this is a man by the name of Dr. Samuel Prescott. Now, put yourself in Samuel Prescott's shoes. Samuel Prescott was in his early 20s. He was a doctor. He was out that night. Now, this is about 1:30 in the morning when they meet this guy. He was out that night meeting up with his fiancée, who he was soon to marry. So Sam Prescott sees these 2 guys ride up to him, and they give him the cheesiest pickup line I can think of. They say, "Why, sir, you look like a high son of liberty to me. Why don't you come help us alert the entire countryside that the regulars are out, and they mean us no good." So if you're Sam Prescott, you're looking at these 2 guys. They've been riding all night. Their horses are bloody, right? And they walk up to you and in effect say, "Hey, how's about some treason? How about it's 1:30 in the morning. I know you're tired. I know you had a lovely evening with your fiance, but how's about some treason?" And that's what they say to this guy without any guns to his head, without having to bribe him or nothing. Well, Sam Prescott was down for the cause, and Sam Prescott, without ever having met these 2 guys, said, "You know what? That sounds like the most important thing I could think of doing right now." So instead of just riding along with you guys and alerting everybody, all the people on the road from here to Concord know me. I am a doctor. I've been making house calls around here, and not only will I ride along with you, but I'll vouch for the 2 of you that what you say is good. So instead of just riding from important place to important place now, they're kind of knocking on every single door on the way down, which kind of slows them down a little. And these 3 riders, pretty soon, as they're going from Lexington to Concord, come upon 2 British riders in the they see them in the trees. And Paul Revere is the kind of guy who says, "You know what? There's 3 of us, and there's 2 of them. Why don't we take them?" Right? So they charge on the horses, go towards these 2 guys. About halfway there, those 2 guys turn into 4. And Paul Revere's still the kind of guy that whips the horses forward. Well, I guess they had the momentum, right? But as they get real close to those 4 guys now, well, the 4 guys turned into 10 guys. And those 10 guys surrounded Paul Revere, Dawes, and Prescott. And that was the end of Paul Revere's ride. And a lot of people don't know that Paul Revere actually got captured on the way to Concord. And so Paul Revere gets captured. William Dawes, he breaks his horse into one direction, but He makes it away, but his horse bolts and they get near some house, a wild animal. So the horse throws him off and he hits his head. So that's the end of William Dawes' ride. That's the end of Paul Revere's ride. And there's one guy left, Sam Prescott. And Sam Prescott is the only one of the three that actually makes it to Concord and tells the guys at Concord what's coming down the road toward them. So it's not even Plan A, right? It's not Revere. It's not Plan B. It's not Dawes. It's not, you know, the other plan with the lights in the tower. They had all kinds of other stuff. They had signal fires, signal guns. You know, one town would shoot 3 times out a window. That meant not only for their guys to get together, but for the next town that heard it, that they should shoot 3 times out a window. So they had all these plans, and there wasn't even any of those. It was Plan F. It was like this random guy they find in the middle of the road, who not only goes along with what they're doing, but actually is the only one to succeed in telling Concord. His own brother goes, and he tells his brother, his brother keeps riding west. So it's a pretty it's pretty amazing to see how the people at that time were working together, just willing to drop whatever they were doing and help spread the word for whatever's going on. It's pretty amazing, and I'll tell you a bit how that story ends for him. But as for Paul Revere's ride, Paul Revere is now captured. He's surrounded by British scouts on horses. And they ask him who he is. And if you've ever seen, I guess, any movie where there's prisoners of wars, I guess you're only supposed to tell your name, rank, and serial number. But Paul Revere didn't get the message. So when they ask him who he is, what he's doing, not only does he tell them that he's Paul Revere, and then they look at their list that says, whoa, here's this guy, he's right there on our list. Paul Revere tells them the whole thing. Paul Revere tells these guys, well, I've been out all night alerting the countryside. And I did such a good job of it that I consider my mission done. See, you wouldn't have been able to capture me without a bullet, putting a bullet in my back, unless I had already finished alerting the countryside. So what that means for you, Redcoats, is that when your men make it to Lexington, there's going to be 500 militia there, waiting in Lexington for them. And they're all dead men. Your guys are all dead. So you should go turn around. This is Paul Revere telling his own captors this. You should turn around, go tell the leader of that doomed expedition to turn around and go back to Boston. Otherwise, he's going to have to get carried back. So Paul Revere, captured, with no power of his own, is trying to convince these guys that they're dead men. And after a little while of this, where they're not really believing him, and he keeps going on and on with the story, these guys hear a sound in the woods that must have been about 75 muskets all going off at once. And their faces turn white, and they turn around and they go, you know what, I think this guy's right. So they actually let Paul Revere go. They turn around and they start riding back towards Lexington. Those Redcoats meet up with the... So for these Redcoats, one of the keys here is that they didn't even know. These Redcoats that are out in the country, they didn't even know that any column of Redcoats was coming up the street in Mass Ave towards Lexington. They'd been out for days. And Gage was the kind of guy who only tells you what you need to know, right? So those guys only needed to know, well, go stop any riders in the road. But you don't need to know why, right? And those guys marching up the hill, they didn't even know, up towards, from Boston, out to Concord. Most of them didn't even know they were going to Concord. They're just marching along the road, getting woken up in the middle of the night. See, the reason that Paul Revere had all this time to go out and war the countryside, because the Redcoats were really, really slow that night. Just to leave Boston, they had decided that they were going to cross the river, not by the bridge, which would have been the obvious way, but they were going to get 800 Redcoats into these little tiny boats. And they were going to string 6 or 7 boats together, row them all across the Charles River, and land in the most secretive spot in Cambridge they could possibly think of.